Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. And firstly, apologies for some of the timing issues. I don't think LinkedIn worked out that we changed from the spring equinox at a different time to the rest of the world. So I'm glad you've all managed to make it this afternoon or this morning. My name is Penny Hayes. I am the COO of the Trustbridge and also manage ADPP, which is our peer-to-peer community for data protection professionals and cyber professionals, holding a number of meetings across the UK in the next few months and hoping to spread those out across the rest of the world in the coming months, much delayed from 2020. This is one of the series of webinars that we've been running over the last few months, and we've been looking at topical issues around the data protection and cybersecurity arena. So following our ransomware webinar that we ran a couple of weeks ago, we wanted to discuss the issues surrounding cyber insurance. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome Darren Vi here today, who's the VP and Cyber Lead Professional Liabilities Claims Manager at Arch Insurance. So welcome, Darren. Thank you very much. And he's here today with David Clark from the Trustbridge. So before we start, Darren, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So as Penny said, my name's Darren Vi. I work for Arch Insurance, who is a global insurer in the Lloyd's market and on company paper as well. I've worked for Arch for the past 5 years. Before that, I worked for a global insurer, Chubb Insurance, for the past 17 years. In that time, I've done a mixture of mainly cyber with professional liability, US and UK. So I've got a lot of grey hairs from it, should we put it that way?
I can imagine. Thank you. And David, your background is pretty much predominantly cyber and managing a number of cyber incidents. So can you give us a little bit of background on you as well?
Absolutely. Thanks, Penny. At one time I was responsible for security, the architecture and the management of the operations teams for the world's largest financial private trading network, trading $3.5 trillion a day. Managed some global SOCs, managing security for FTSE 500 companies. And obviously, past few years doing a lot more on SOC 2, ISO and data protection.
David. If anybody's got any questions, please put them in the Q&A section or the chat section in the webinar, and we'll answer those as we go along. Now, Darren, we want to look at a number of areas today, primarily looking at the different types of cyber insurance and how the insurer actually responds to security incidents, the risk elements and how to mitigate those, which I know David's got a lot to say along that front, and also how we respond when there is a data breach and a cybersecurity attack. And of course, the key question really is, will the insurance pay out? But first of all, could you talk us through a little bit about the different types of cyber insurance that are available?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, cyber insurance has changed quite a lot over the years. I mean, when I first started doing cyber insurance, it was mainly kind of like that cyber liability. So kind of covering in the event of a third party claim. It's evolved as the years have gone on to obviously include the first party element. So that would be from basically just getting the client back up and running, and putting them back into the same position as they were prior to the incident. So that will include all first party costs, whether that is kind of defense costs, legal costs, expert costs, forensic accountants costs, public relations costs. All that will fall into that kind of first party element. Yeah. The insurance policy will always also pick up, some of them do, some of them don't, but most of them do pick up the business interruption element. So in the event that a client is down for a number of days, there'll be a policy that can trigger to kind of reimburse the insured for any losses arising from the time when they're not operational.
And that can be quite a long time.
It can be, yeah, it can be, and again, it's all dependent on kind of how quick you can kind of get someone back up and running, and we'll probably go on to that a little bit in a minute, kind of thing. But you know, and it's whether or not the do or don't in terms of the ransomware payment, whether you pay the ransom, whether you don't pay the ransom, and you're offsetting, you know, what's the impact on restoring, all that kind of thing. But another element of the insurance policy will also pick up the ransom payment as well. So there's lots of element basically that it's gone from really kind of liability to first party and third party, and broaden that kind of coverage for a client.
Well, that's really interesting what you're saying there about sometimes it may well pay the ransom. During our webinar with Malcolm from Squire Patton Boggs a week or so ago, we were discussing the consequences of paying in a ransom. And obviously, if you're a business owner or senior management of an organization, you want that company or that organization back up and running as quickly as possible. And you're managing this under tremendous stress. So presumably the immediate response is to pay. But actually, there's lots of consequences for that, including potentially criminal proceedings, because if you have paid to a known criminal or into some sort of terrorist bank account, then you could be liable, the organization could be liable for all sorts of issues there, presumably.
That's correct, yeah. And I mean, the way, it's a very kind of like, you will only pay a ransom in the, you've got to exhaust all avenues before you go down that route. And if you've got one of your forensic experts that's saying, backups are not working, the insured's going to be down for months, if we pay the ransom or negotiate the ransom and we can pay it and we can get the client reinstalled and back up and running within 2 days, then we obviously have to kind of consider those options, because like you say, it's the client that is kind of like, very stressed out because their business is not operational. They're kind of, they want them back up and running, and they just want the quickest solution, whether that's pay or don't pay, just get me back up and running. And obviously we're there to support the client and help them through it, and not make any rash decisions as to kind of paying that ransom when maybe we don't need to. And our experts will go through all the due diligence as best as they can on any ransom payment to make sure that the people that they are paying aren't known on any criminal list, aren't known on any terrorist list. And it's kind of like the sanctions check as best as you can when you're doing that kind of payment. But absolutely, we're very, very careful, and we will only, an insurer will only pay a ransom as the last resort. And we have to kind of, for that, we have to kind of, it's not a case that we just hand the money over and trust that they're going to do it. We ask them to kind of prove who they are and prove that they've got the key, prove that they've got the evidence that can give us kind of like a bit of a taster to make sure that they are going to give us the key, and that key will work. But again, we haven't, generally it's a code of conduct between the criminals that they don't generally kind of say, give us £1 million, demand, and we'll get you back up and running. And then you pay the million, they say, well, give me another million, generally they don't do that. And probably David would be better to comment on that side of it, but in my experience, it's like the code of conduct amongst criminals is, if they do muck people around, they get a known reputation within the experts, and the experts are going to be advising us and the client saying, you don't want to be, you don't want to be playing with these people because they're just going to muck you around. You're going to be wasting your money.
I have to say the concept of code of conduct and criminal, it's a bit of an oxymoron, but I get your point.
And I guess the other thing is whether the kind of the exfiltrated data has maybe been multi-sold on as well. So,
Absolutely.
It's a never-ending problem potentially.
How do you safeguard against that? Can you safeguard against that?
You can't really. Again, it goes back to the thing, you might want to pay a ransom of a figure, as negotiate the best you can to kind of suppress that kind of risk of them distributing it, because again, you're going to pay them on the basis they're going to destroy any data they've got. But it depends how valuable that data is, what the data, is it just email addresses, is it personal information?
Yeah.
So again, we're going to obviously evaluate very carefully on what we're going to do and how we're going to move it forward. End result is we want to get the client back up and running as quickly as possible. Sure.
Do you help negotiate with the ransom? Do you put in, are you the third party negotiator, or do you have a team of third party negotiators, or is that really not within your remit?
So the way it works from the insurance side of it is the client, we will work with the client to retain all the relevant people, whether that is IT forensics, PR consultants, etc. And then it will be down to, the negotiation part of it is normally embedded within the IT forensics. Or if it's not, if they don't have that offering, then there is, I mean, there's companies like Coveware is the well-known company that do a lot of the negotiations, but there'd be a third party expert that is brought in that specializes in negotiations. Yeah. They know all the criminal groups. They keep records of who they're paying and who they're negotiating with. They learn kind of their traits of how they communicate, the language, the spelling errors, the grammatical, all that kind of stuff. They really study it to know whether or not these people are genuine part of a criminal group or want to be part of criminal groups that they're not. And it's very kind of technical. So we as insurers don't get involved in that negotiation side of it.
Okay. But presumably when you're looking to insure an organisation, you must undertake some sort of risk assessment. I know, David, you and I undertake risk assessments on a regular basis with clients, but there must be a slightly different risk assessment that you would undertake as a potential insurer.
That's correct. Yes. So when we underwrite a risk from, I mean, obviously I'm on the claim side. So my underwriting team, they will literally do a full due diligence on every client that wants to take out insurance with us. And we can also, I mean, another thing which, it's something that is really key and really important, which a lot of insurers do offer, is kind of that pre-breach assistance. So if you take out insurance, it's kind of, we can point you in the right direction to have some help to kind of train people, desktop, all that kind of stuff, to make sure that they really do like a bit of a scan of their systems to make sure there's no doors open. So it's a bit of a developing area, and a lot of clients have pushed back a little bit on it, that they just don't, they think they don't need it. But I think the more breaches that people are starting to see is starting to drum, because we're getting a lot more inquiries like, how can you help us, be a better risk? How can we make sure that we don't have a breach? So that, but we do ask, we have questions and answers that we require for any policy, any cyber policy that is written under our book.
Well, David, we discussed this in our ransomware webinar. There are some new rules and regulations, aren't there, surrounding the training, the preparation, and the testing that has to be done now with organizations.
Yeah, it's kind of coming in, and we're seeing it a lot more especially in the US as well, that how these things need to be kind of managed and what needs to be done beforehand. And that was the thing I was going to ask you, Darren. The kind of amount of preparation company needs to do. We've seen companies, their insurance policies have gone up hugely, but if they get, Cyber Essentials, ISO 27001, survive the insurance company's due diligence, they can substantially reduce the premium.
Absolutely. And that is something that, it's attractive to an insurer, because if the client's a better risk, it's a lower risk for insurers to take on. So, I've seen it in other insurers and our insurance as well, is that if insurers really do kind of work with insurers and kind of get all that preparation prior to any breach happening, it does, one, it makes them a better risk, and it reduces the risk of any potential incident. But not only that, it also makes them ready and prepared in the event that something happens. They know what to do, and they know not to literally panic and go and retain people that they don't know, Google search people and things like that. They know the avenues, because what we try and do is link them with all the vendors that we use. So it's kind of so that they know the first port of call, they can pick up the phone and speak, and they go, right, in the event of this, you speak to that person. And it puts a lot more control on insurers' side of it, that we're there to help from day one. It's not a case that the insured client goes off and does their own thing and comes to us after the event, because then it's difficult conversations with insurers. We like to be involved from day one to make sure that we are fully engaged.
Well, I think that's it. In one of the key areas of develop a data breach policy for an organization is to figure out who they're going to call. And David, your favorite expression of escalation. If somebody finds out that there's been an attack, who do they call first, and how do they then get the senior management's attention, especially if all their phone systems have gone down?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just making sure that the client is ready, and as long as they're ready and they know what to do in the event that, I mean, the insurance is there to pass off the risk So we're there to pick up that risk of something happening, and we're there to get them basically back up and running as quickly as possible, and provide them whatever assistance they need, whatever vendor they need, because it's in our interest to get the insurer back up and running as quickly as possible, because otherwise you'll end up with a business interruption loss, which is quite significant. The longer we sit doing nothing, or, you know, it doesn't, you know, we want to kind of mitigate everyone's losses.
Sure. Absolutely. So would you say there are key situations where perhaps you wouldn't pay out, key errors that companies make, which would invalidate their insurance?
I mean, if the insured, you know, I keep saying, if the client went and dealt with a cyber loss on their own and paid a ransom and dealt with it all, you know, literally, you know, got themselves back up and running and everything else, and then came to insurers 6 months later and said, "I'll just let you know, we had this incident 6 months ago. Can we have reimbursement?"
Yeah, sure.
That's the incident that would be a tricky conversation from an insurance point of view, is because we haven't been involved. The policies are claims made and reported within policies. So they have a duty to report it to insurers, and they also have to seek authority before they retain any experts or have any negotiations or pay any claim. So that's the only kind of way, as long as the insurers engage from day one, there isn't really, I mean, and I'm speaking very general terms, the cyber insurance policy is there to respond to an incident.
And every step of the way, they would, you know, get guidance and, you know, information from the insurance company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I suppose is exactly
exactly
the same way as if you have a flood in the house. You wouldn't necessarily go and sort that all out yourself without contacting the insurance company first, or certainly not in my experience. David, that you can be fined, obviously, for any data or cyber breach, especially if there's any issues with the data subjects that may have themselves suffered any kind of financial loss or personal reputation loss. Could if you are prepared and you've got a data breach plan in place and you've done as much as you can, are you going to minimize those fines in that situation? David?
Well, I guess one of the things is every company's got to be seen to be doing the best they can with the resources they have and the capability they have. So it's got to be appropriate. You know, if there is no plan in place and there is nothing in place to stop bad things happening at all, you're probably not going to be in a good situation. Sure. But, you know, if you've done the best you can, you know, appropriate to the size of the company and the resources you have, you're going to be in the best position you can for a very bad situation.
And presumably, as we always say, evidence is the key thing. You need to evidence that you put various protocols in place.
Absolutely. And kind of as Darren said, and I think it was a really, really good point, is that quite often you're doing a cost benefit analysis, pay the fine, rebuild the systems. Can you get the data back as it is? Yeah. And then that puts you in a stronger position potentially for any negotiation as well. You know, if you know that you can get back up and running, you're then maybe negotiating on, will the data be, you know, spread all over social media if they have exfiltrated the data. If they haven't exfiltrated the data, you could be in a very strong position because your recovery, you know, could be done maybe relatively, and I've got to say, I haven't seen that very often, relatively easily and quickly. And I think the other kind of point is you probably don't want your systems back in the state that they were because they were infiltrated. So actually you've got to do a quick bit, inverted commas, of upgrading and making sure it won't happen again a week later or a couple of days later.
Even on the backup, presumably, if you have a backup.
Well, the thing about backups, what we've seen is a lot of companies have a backup, but it unfortunately takes forever to restore it, and that time scale is just unacceptable, which generally means either a rebuild of everything or going back to Darren's bit, kind of working out what's a good negotiation.
So going back to the fines, Darren, does insurance cover a fine? If you get a fine from the regulatory authority, for example, for the data breach, would the insurance cover that?
So generally, fines are not recoverable under insurance policies. So it wouldn't cover any fine, but we would obviously work with the client in terms of trying to minimise the risk of any of that kind of thing happening.
Okay.
And I think there's been some cases, haven't there, or that, the regulators say the fine is for you, it's not for someone else to pay.
Right.
Yeah.
Or my paraphrasing there, but I think that was the general.
So what about if a data subject has suffered a personal financial loss, for example, as a result of a data breach? Would you cover that?
Yes, that would be something, because that comes under third party liability. So that would be something that would be triggered by the policy.
Okay.
Obviously, they would have to prove their case. What generally happens if, say, for instance, we know that there is a data breach and there are individuals' data that has been, on the dark web or used, etc., we would, so the way that the insurance policy and the way that the experts will advise the client is that we will be paying for kind of like a year credit monitoring, and it's like a bit of like another insurance policy for that individual, and we will flag anything whereby a credit card's taken out or their name's being used in a loan, etc., etc. Some companies, or I was out in Canada last week at a conference, and some companies are actually providing 3 years credit monitoring, which is interesting, just to give up.
Yeah.
Generally, it's always been, in my experience, it's always been about 12 months is what you give for credit monitoring.
Right.
But yes, anything where a third party has suffered a loss and they claim against the client for arising from a cyber event would trigger a standard cyber policy.
So that could be quite substantial if it was for example, a class action suit or something like that.
Absolutely. And we've seen matters where we've had it in certain states in the US, where there have been thousands. So yes, like you say, you could end up with multipliers of thousands rather than, a handful.
So I suppose the key question is always, how do you mitigate and minimize the risk of a data breach? And David, training is critical for all staff.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a number of layers to this. It's obviously following best practice, government guidance, training as well, making sure the company's fully on board with the right policies and procedures and that they're well understood within the company. Internal audit, external audit, and insurance companies audit due diligence as well. I think all of that feeds in to kind of capture as much as possible of what can be done. And the thing about security, it's not one thing. If it was one thing, it'd be really easy to fix. It's actually multiple layers, and making those multiple layers work.
Talking about due diligence on third parties, we're in the third party supply chain, we're seeing a lot of that going on at the moment, with questionnaires being sent from clients to potential suppliers, that sort of thing. And here's a question for you, Darren. If a third party has a data breach or a cyber attack, which we see a lot of, and that affects your client, how does the whole insurance payout work in that situation?
So, I mean, we would normally expect that the third party would pick it up.
Right.
We would be looking, I mean, they should have their own insurance in place, which is probably one of the questionnaires you refer to when, a lot of our clients, have vendors, third parties, and they're engaging in contracts with them. They have this questionnaire that goes out and says, in the event, are you covered? And so, but saying that, we would also, if we felt that the insured was under attack or something, then obviously, as long as the insured systems have been compromised and they, somehow someone's got into it, whether it's arising from a third party or not, we would always help, and we'll obviously try, we'd get experts in. It would follow the same thing, but the only thing we would do is, likely after the event, we will be looking to that third party for a recovery.
Yeah, and that's part of, I think, concepts are now with third party chains, and we've seen in the US, in certain states in the US, there is a legal requirement now for something known as the WISP. Again, we've run a webinar on that, recording of which is available through the site. But the WISP, the Written Information Security Program, is really a public statement to your third-party chain to say, we have these security protocols and data protection protocols in place. And presumably you'd advise anyone to ask those questions or ask for a WISP from anybody that they're doing business with in that third-party
Absolutely.
chain.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we would be pushing all that, and we'd be advising our clients to say, if you are going to do that, then please do, if you're engaged. And even part of the underwriting process we do in our questionnaires, we ask, You know, do they have any third-party vendors they rely on for anything? You know, so whether it's systems, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And if the answer is then yes, it then follows another number of questions, and it's up to the client if they, you know, they go back to the third party and say, look, our insurers have raised these issues, but it also helps the client if they weren't aware that they needed it. So we try, again, we're always trying to help a client, you know, really kind of be as tight as they can on their network to avoid the risk of them being attacked.
Of course. No, that makes sense. Bill's put a question or a statement into the Q&A here. He said he's aware of some instances where the client went with the technical response team recommended by the insurer, but the team owed their loyalty to the insurer rather than to the client. Interesting. It's like a conflict of interest there. They found isolated terminals with unsupported software, which policy, even though this had not been the attack vector. Okay, I think I understand that. So is that in that situation, would presumably that would nullify the policy?
And sorry, because it broke up then when you was talking. So they had an expert come in, and with that expert, they found that there was something not locked down as much as what it should do.
Unsupported software.
So you know, it is a tricky question. It's a good question and a tricky question. And without seeing the policy, I don't know. So it would be, you know, if it was related to this incident and it was, you know, they got in for a back door because this gate was left open, and they'd advised on their proposal form that they had all this different locks and, you know, bolts and everything else, then it could impact the coverage. I can't really comment on particular policies because I don't know the wording, but I would say that if, you know, if we go in and we find, for example, someone hasn't checked their backups and the backups don't work, but they said on the prop form that they had backups, if the backups are nothing to do with, or you know, it doesn't pose a big impact on what we're looking at, I personally wouldn't really be looking at that as an issue. I'd be looking to help the client, because you know, if they said, oh, we checked the backups a month ago and it was working back then, but it's not working now, I wouldn't be going, well, you said you had backups, because they do have backups. So again, it's just, each policy is different. So I know it's not a straightforward answer, but it would all just depend on the circumstances.
Presumably you work with the client when you're putting a policy together to try and find the right policy for them and to cover as many issues as possible.
Absolutely. And again, going back to David's point, is, you know, if the client does all the preparation up front before any of this, you would like to think if there were any holes and plugs to be made, that would be found in the pre-breach training and sessions and offerings that people can get. So you would like to think, really, if clients do want to kind of really embrace cyber insurance and really kind of like, yes, we need it, we want to make, you know, we really want to be a good risk, we want to make sure our systems are tight, then that's, again, just really recommending, and I can't emphasize it enough, how important that pre-breach assessment are carried out.
No, absolutely. We totally agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why we put together risk assessments, and in fact have started working with a cyber simulation training workshop, which is great fun, but at the same time does help to emphasize some of the perhaps potential gaps in an organization, not necessarily from their software or their processes, but little things like, as we said before, who do they call, the escalation, who's managing the social media feed, who's managing the communications out to the wide world. I mean, the classic example for me is the Australian mobile phone company that had a breach back in September last year. Nobody could find the CEO for 3 weeks. You know, that's not the right way to manage the communication out to the public and to the people that have been affected. So I think it's very important to have that whole process and procedure in place, and that's what we're trying to do with the simulation, is to help identify to certain people what they need to be having preparation, where their gaps are. So I think that's really, really important. That was great. I think there's a lot swirling around here for us to take in and assimilate. But if anybody has any other questions, please do put them in the chat. If not, I'd like to thank you both very much for today, and I'll put a recording of this webinar up on the website and send out links to anybody. you got any final thoughts that you would like to share with our audience today?
No, just thanks for inviting me. It's been great to obviously discuss this. And yeah, I mean, if there are any questions or anything you'd like to just generalize questions to me, feel free to reach out to Penny or myself directly. I'm more than happy to help.
That's great. And David, what's your final thought?
I think thanks, Darren. Some great insights there. Yeah. And I think it's, doing the best you can. Yeah. And, help is around and insurance companies can supply that. Yeah,
absolutely. Brilliant. Oh, hang on. Before you go, I've got one more question. Oh, no, it was just somebody saying thank you. And I'd like to reiterate that. Thank you very much indeed for both of your contributions today. And happy Easter.
Yep.
See you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.